Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Brandon Warmke.
I want to begin tonight in a very unlikely place. The comments section at an online recipe blog. I don't know if any of you know this blog. Anyone ever been to this blog before? Okay. Our story starts in the comments on a taste-alike recipe for P.F. Chang's lettuce wraps. And on this one recipe, there were 551 comments. Almost all of them were people fighting. And I'm going to walk you through a sampling of these comments, and I apologize if you can't read the print here. I'll read it for you if you can't see this. So we'll begin with Donna. Don't be fooled. Got food poisoned at P.F. Chang's Pasadena Sunday afternoon eating chicken wraps. This is a food recipe blog, okay? This is not Yelp, okay? Ended up in emergency for 4 hours. Also, chicken on other meals were overcooked. Food was salty. Also, others in our family had other stomach issues eating the food. Very disappointed in the food, not to mention cost of emergency room, ? Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. Watch out. Glenn replied, Donna, people often think that it was the last place they ate where they got food poisoning from. Do you realize it usually will take 8 to 14 hours after eating for you to get food poisoning? Most likely it was your home-cooked meal you made your family and not the restaurant you ate at an hour before. Funny how people will always try and blame someone else for their own bad cooking. You ready for Donna's, this is Liza's reply on Donna's behalf. Hi, Glenn. If you could refrain from mansplaining to Donna about her own illness, that'd be cool. And on the note of you being sexist, why would you assume that Donna cooked her last meal? Maybe your assumption has something to do with the fact that she is a woman? And furthermore, how do you know that she cooks for her family, or that she even has a family? God forbid a woman do something with her life other than having a family and cooking for them. Your assumptions are disgusting. LZ. Liza, did you assume Glenn's gender because of his name? Interesting that you criticize someone for making assumptions by making assumptions. And then finally, we'll stop with Pat. Wow. Assume much, Liza? Would you be saying the same thing if you thought Glenn was a woman? It's your assumptions and agenda that are disgusting. You are the one that's sexist. I want to remind you, this is a taste-alike recipe blog for P.F. Chang's chicken lettuce wraps. Now, my question tonight is, why is so much public discourse about politics and morality so nasty? And you don't have to go to the comments on a recipe blog to see this. If you've been online, on Twitter, on Facebook, Reddit, watch cable news, talk to your classmates, talk to your colleagues, you know that this gets nasty fast. And even on a recipe blog, people apparently can't help themselves. Now, the nastiness of public discourse is not a new problem. This is Australian philosopher Kurt Beyer in 1965 observed, moral talk is often repugnant. leveling moral accusations, expressing moral indignation, passing moral judgment, allotting the blame, administering moral reproof, justifying oneself, and above all, moralizing. Who can enjoy such talk? Imagine if Kurt Beyer had seen Reddit, who knows what he would have said. Now, I can't explain all of the bad behavior that you see in public discourse. But in our short time tonight, I want to try to convince you that one reason that public discourse is so nasty is that people use it not to seek truth, or to find common ground, or to find wisdom, or to compromise, or simply to understand what others think or believe. I want to try to convince you that a lot of people use their moral discussions simply to show off. And so I want to try to suggest to you that one reason public discourse is so nasty is that people use it to impress others and seek status. In short, many of us use public discourse as a vanity project. And we're just going to call this, for our purposes, moral grandstanding. So here's what I want to do with our time. First, I want to say a bit about what grandstanding is. I want to explain why we do this. We'll take a short detour through some psychology to explain why people engage in this kind of behavior. And I want to give you a field guide for grandstanding. I'll show you 5 ways that grandstanding tends to rear its ugly head in public discourse. Then I'm going to give you a few reasons. In the book, there's a whole host of them. I'm only going to mention a few tonight. Try to suggest to you that grandstanding is bad and it has a negative effect on our public discourse. And finally, I'm going to make a few suggestions humbly about what we can do to improve our own contributions to public discourse. All right, you ready? If you had a bumper sticker and you wanted to put the definition of grandstanding on that bumper sticker, it would say something like this: grandstanding is the use of moral talk for self-promotion. Now, what do we mean by moral talk? Well, I don't mean anything real specific. I mean talk about things like justice or equality or freedom, who is bad, who is good, which actions are right and which actions are wrong, what should we do as a state or national government. This is all under the umbrella of moral talk. And grandstanders turn their conversations about these very important issues into a forum for self-promotion. Now, what do I mean by self-promotion? We'll talk more about this in a moment, but roughly, grandstanders want to be seen as morally impressive. Sometimes they just have a very generic desire to be seen as morally good, maybe morally exceptional. Sometimes grandstanders just want to be seen as morally decent, where all the rest of you fall below the line of moral mediocrity. I'm at least decent. All of you, terrible, terrible people, you really got to get your act together. I'm at least decent. Sometimes grandstanders are very specific about what they want others to believe about them. Maybe you want your audience to think that you care most about the troops. Maybe you want your audience to think that you care most about the poor. Okay? So this is the bumper sticker version. We can get a little more precise by thinking about grandstanding in terms of a simple formula. And those of you like me who did not enjoy math, this is the only math in this talk, okay? And it's just a simple addition, so you'll be just fine. So you can think of grandstanding as having 2 basic features, and you have to have both features to have grandstanding. First, you have to have what my author Justin Tosi and I call the recognition desire. This is a desire to be recognized as morally impressive. Okay? Now, obviously, you don't have to have the moral qualities that you think, you want others to believe. In fact, you might not believe that you have these qualities at all. You just want other people to think you have them. Maybe you're trying to impress a date, okay? You don't care most about the poor, but you think she does, and you're trying to, get a second date. So you don't even have to believe that you have these moral qualities, although I think most grandstanders probably do think they are morally above board and pretty impressive. So you have to have this recognition desire, and then you have to say something or tweet something or write something in an attempt to get others to believe what you want them to believe about you. So you're trying to satisfy this desire for status, to impress people. Okay? And so you say something. Now, often, grandstanders don't just come out and say things like, I care the most about the poor. That is impolite. Everyone would know what you're doing if you just said, oh, and by the way, I'm the most moral person here. That's not what grandstanders do. They're a little more savvy. They use what philosophers a language called indirect speech. I'll give you some examples in a moment. But they don't come out and just say they're impressive. They say things that lead you to believe that they're impressive. And this is why, and this is very important, it's very hard to tell whether someone is grandstanding. It's very hard. Just like lying or bragging, whether someone is lying depends on whether they're trying to deceive you. Whether someone's bragging depends on whether they're trying to show off. And so grandstanding, because part of what it means to grandstand is in the head, you can't just look at what someone says and know they're grandstanding. This will be important when we come back to discuss what we should do about grandstanding, but I just want to point that out for now. Now, why do we grandstand? Why do we do this? Because every single one of us desires social status. A drive for social status is one of the most fundamental human interests and desires, along with food and shelter and sex and friendship and community. It's very important that people think highly of you. If no one wants to be your friend, no one wants to hang around with you, that's bad. That's a bad life. It's important to have social status. Okay? Now, and as psychologists have recently discovered, they've suggested that there's actually two different kinds of social status. One is called prestige status. This involves having knowledge or skills or good moral character, right? People look up to you. Prestige, you are prestigious. So if you're a world championship tennis player, Mother Teresa, these are people with high prestige status. Dominant status is a little darker. It's a little more mischievous. Dominant status involves being feared, being dangerous, having people be afraid of you. So, on the ancient savannah, having prestige status might mean you know how to take down a zebra, or you know where the water is. Dominant status is, I will club you in my cave if you cross me and my family. That's dominant status. You're going to be afraid of me. Okay? Now, every single one of us has desires for status. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a desire for status. What matters is when and where you decide to seek that status. So just like a sex drive is a perfectly normal thing, it matters when and how and where you let those drives come out. Similarly with status. It's perfectly okay to seek status, to be impressive, to want to be famous, to want to do great things. That's all great. The problem is, grandstanders have discovered that you can use public moral discourse to get status. And the suggestion that we'll talk about in a few minutes is that this is not an appropriate context to seek status. You should have other aims in public discourse than trying to impress people. Okay? And we've done some studies with psychologist Joshua Grubbs at University of New Mexico. We did about 6 studies with 6,000 participants. We developed some grandstanding scales, and it turns out people will basically just tell you they use public discourse to seek status. It's not hard to get people to admit this. Okay? Now, What does grandstanding look like? I'm going to give you a field guide. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, and I want to give you a field guide for identifying what grandstanding often looks like. Although I want to stress that just because someone does one of these 5 things, it doesn't mean they're grandstanding. Okay? So here are the 5 common forms of grandstanding. The first one is in honor of our chancellor here in his former football coaching career. One way that people grandstand is by piling on. People pile on in public discourse by joining in what others have already said in order to impress the crowd. So someone might say something like, I want to echo what others have said. This petition is vital to the cause of justice, and I happily support it. We must show that we are on the right side of history. I can't wait to sign. And the idea is that other good people are signing up to sign this petition, and if you are a good person, you should do it too and make a public show of it. So we might call this something like a praise pile-on, agreeing with someone to be seen on the right side. You're not left out. You're one of the good ones. But there are also blame piles. These are negative, you think about like a cancellation or a doxing online. This is when people use the real or imagined moral errors of others to sanction them, blame them, dox them, attack them, get them fired, to make themselves look good. And people will often engage in this behavior to show that they do not tolerate any imperfection. Now, what's going on here? Well, one thing that's going on in these kinds of piles on is an expression of what psychologists call social comparison. So the way that you think of yourself morally often is a reflection of how you think of yourself compared to other people. So like when I go home, I'm tall. I'm the tallest person in my family, believe it or not. I feel like a giant when I go home. I'm also funny at home, Like my parents think my jokes are funny. And I go home and think I'm funny. And then I hang out with my friends, my tall, funny friends, and I'm no longer tall or funny. So how you think about yourself morally, too, is often cued by how other people are acting and behaving. So we assess ourselves in relation to others. And so if other people are, signing a petition, joining in on a doxing or something, grandstanders register their view to avoid being seen as cowardly or cautious in relation to the group. So sometimes grandstanders pile on. Second, often grandstanding takes the form of what we call ramping up. This happens when people make increasingly strong claims about the matter under discussion. Here's an example. We can all agree the senator's behavior was wrong and should be called out, one person might say. Someone else replies, okay, please. If you really cared about justice, you should seek her removal from office. We simply cannot tolerate this behavior, and I won't stand for it. And someone else chimes in, as someone who has long fought for justice, I'm sympathetic to these suggestions, but I want to suggest the senator should be in jail. We would all do well to remember the world is watching. What's going on here? People are engaging in what we might think of as a moral arms race. So if I think of myself as caring deeply for the poor or caring deeply about the troops or about justice or equality, and you make your position known, we should do X. And I think of myself as being more committed to the poor or the troops or equality than you, then I have to outdo you, or I have to cede my position as the most caring person to you in the group. So often, public discourse turns into an arms race. This is the whole recipe blog phenomenon. People constantly trying to outdo each other with how committed they are to morality. So the goal here is not to arrive at the truth, not to understand, it's simply to outdo. So just like in the Cold War, the U.S., the Americans and the Soviets were, amassing nuclear arms, right? The goal wasn't to hit the right number of warheads. The goal was simply to amass more warheads than the enemy. And that's what's often going on in public discourse. Third, grandstanding often, and I have to, look, we named this before, okay? We wrote the original paper in 2014, and we were just stubborn, so we never changed the title of this, but it has to do with being, trumping up charges on someone. So here's what happens. Often in public discourse, people will insist on the existence of a moral problem where there is none. This is the moral version of the princess and the pea. So some of you who are familiar with this, princess, test of her royalty, she can feel a little pea underneath 20 mattresses and 20 beds. She's so sensitive. She can sense a pea under 20 mattresses. Some people want to project that this is the level of their sensitivity about morality. People concoct moral problems to show how sensitive or compassionate or caring they are. What's overlooked by other people doesn't escape the attention of your watchful moral eye. There's lots of examples of this. So, if you're of a certain age, you remember Obama once wore a tan suit to a press conference, and everyone on it, there's a lot of this is unbelievably, inappropriate for him to do this. He once saluted some Marines with a latte in his hand. Evidently, this is a violation of military protocol. Okay, and this was on the news for 3 days. Okay. Often when people trump up, what they're saying is, listen to me, my moral radar is impeccable. I know what morality demands. None of you can see the truth. And so there is a kind of moral entrepreneurship. Fourth, grandstanding often takes the form of excessive emotional displays or reports. Sometimes these are negative. You might say something like, I'm absolutely outraged, I'm sickened, I'm disgusted, I want to vomit. Or it could be positive. Someone reports being so in awe of someone for his costless stand on some moral issue among his like-minded friends. And we do this to show that we're especially caring or affected or tuned in. And what happens is people know that extreme moral reactions to things are reliable signifiers of moral conviction. So psychologists have studied, if someone's outraged, people think, oh, there must be something wrong here. And grandstanders exploit this feature of our psychology, and they get people to think they have high moral convictions by being outraged or disgusted or affected by everything that happens in the world. And fifth and finally, grandstanding often looks like dismissiveness. This happens when people talk as if their views about controversial matters are utterly obvious, and anyone who disagrees or has doubts is beneath contempt and should be ignored. So any suggestion of doubt or uncertainty reveals a moral deficiency. Morality is not complicated for the grandstander. Someone might say something like, if you can't see this war is unjust, I'm done with you. And if you don't understand why it's unjust, I'm not going to waste my time explaining it to you. Do better. What the grandstander is communicating here is that this is just obvious to any decent person. And since it's not obvious to you, you must not be decent. All right, so that's the field guide. Now I want to pivot to some reasons for thinking this is really bad. Now, in the book, we go through several kinds of arguments, and philosophers have all kinds of resources for arguing why things are bad. We go through some respect-based arguments. We argue that grandstanding is disrespectful to others. We go through some virtue-based arguments. We argue that a virtuous person would not treat public discourse as a vanity project. A virtuous person would engage in public discourse to seek the truth or to help people. They wouldn't do it for egoistic reasons. What I want to focus on today in our short time is to give you some consequence-based arguments. I'm going to suggest that grandstanding has significant social costs, not just for the grandstander or her audience, but for all of us. We're all worse off when we treat public discourse as a vanity project. And the first cost is, Chancellor Boyce mentioned polarization. The first cost is that grandstanding looks like it leads to and causes polarization. We did some studies, and it looks like, given our research, grandstanding is actually pushing people apart. People used to think that if you got a bunch of strangers in a room and talked about politics, they might compromise, they might move closer together. Turns out, you get a bunch of people in a room with different views, and they walk out with stronger views than they walked in with. This phenomenon is called group polarization. People tend to have more extreme views after conversation. Not always, but often. Now, why does this happen? Well, one reason this happens is that what we're doing is engaging in this ramping up effect. So if you have a group of people over here who are like, I am pro-gun. Like, people should have guns are good, okay, maybe they shouldn't be in schools, but okay. And then someone in your group says, well, actually, if you really care about the Second Amendment, everyone should be armed, well, they must care about the Second Amendment. Well, I really care, so then I have to outdo them. And you can imagine someone on the other side doing the very same thing who's anti-gun. Say, okay, I understand guns might be needed in these situations, and someone says, no, if you have a gun, you are a menace to society. Okay, well, they really care. So then I have to outdo them. So because of this ramping up dynamic, often what's happening is people are being pushed to the extremes. Because they think of themselves as moral and they compare their morality to others' morality, this causes them to ramp up their conversations, and the result is increasingly extreme views on both sides. Turns out our research, you might think this is not a left-right phenomenon. Turns out the left and the right grandstanding virtually the exact same amount. What differs is at the extreme. So it's like a U-shaped curve. The more you are on the right or left, the more likely it is that you grandstand. Okay? Centrists are very boring. They're probably coaching T-ball. They're not on Facebook arguing about recipes, okay? But a second problem here is that when we get pushed apart, this leads us to have false beliefs. Because the incentive in these discussions is not to land on the things that are true. The incentive is to stop saying things when you've stopped impressing people. The goal is to say things to impress. So if something stops impressing people, okay, I'm done. And so the incentives are not truth-seeking, they're status-seeking. And the things that please people are not often the things that are true. And so grandstanding is going to increase the likelihood that people say and defend false beliefs. And that's bad. Furthermore, it inspires overconfidence on both sides. Why? Because the middle empties out. And grandstanders, often all they see is the extreme view on the other side. And so if you think, well, if all I'm seeing is the extreme view on the other side, my side is clearly the right, compared to that, my side's clearly the right side. So you become more confident in what your probably false beliefs are and being true. And this overconfidence makes it hard to change your mind. If the only alternative is pure evil, it's really hard to change your mind. And furthermore, it makes it hard to compromise. Why compromise with evil? In our chapter in politics on the book, we discuss why this is so bad for politics, this inability to compromise. So that's the first cost, polarization. Second, Grandstanding also seems to cause conflict in your personal life. This stuff isn't in the book. This is some more recent studies we did. Turns out people who seem to grandstand a lot, you might not be shocked by this, they have lots of conflict in their personal life. Grandstanding tends to create conflict. It turns the public square into a moral arms race that breeds competition, disrespect, punitiveness, and anger. So the more that you use discourse for status, the more you'll be in conflict with your friends, your family, your strangers, down the block, your classmates, your colleagues. Okay, so when you've turned discourse into a battle, not about what's true or false, but about who is the most moral, grandstanders are going to be very likely, for example, to cut off friendships, unfriend people on social media, and end relationships with family. It's bad. Third and finally, I'll mention this cost of grandstanding. This is what we call outrage exhaustion. And this is due to the fact that lots of grandstanders use anger and outrage strategically to impress others. So outrage is a perfectly good emotion. We need outrage. Outrage should be used to identify real injustices or wrongs. Very important tool. But grandstanders abuse this tool for their own selfish purposes. And so when we use outrage to show off, the outrage itself becomes a less reliable signal of injustice. This is like the boy who cried wolf. And so if you're outraged about anything and everything, it's going to be harder to muster outrage when you actually need it. And there's actually some research on this. The more that you get angry about everything, the harder it is to muster anger when it's actually important. You only have so many emotional resources. You can't be angry all the time. It's very hard. But furthermore, outrage exhaustion means that it's harder for other people to identify what really merits outrage. So this is crying wolf about tan suits, latte salutes. This is, if that's what you're outraged about, it's hard for people to know, is a tan suit really, I don't know, it's like they're really angry. Is it really bad? If everything is outrageous, then nothing is. And this is bad, right? So you might think like I'm anti-outrage. I'm not anti-outrage. But the outrage is a tool that has to be used wisely, and grandstanders abuse it, and it affects all of us. All right, so let's talk about practical next steps. Maybe I have or haven't convinced you that grandstanding is bad, but suppose you're convinced that you think people shouldn't use public discourse for selfish or egoistic purposes. What should we do about this? Now, a lot of people, when they ask me what should we do, what they're looking for is some kind of moral grandstander like detector. Like they want to know, like, oh, Harrison, are you grandstanding? Oh, it's going off, it's going off. They want some kind of test. And it's interesting that when we talk about grandstanding, their first response is, you other people. I got to find who's doing this stuff. I got to get to the bottom of this. People want to know how to be better moral police. Okay, now I got the field guide, I got the book, now I'm going to fire up Facebook and really give it to them. That's what people want. And I'm going to tell you, if that's what you want, you're going to be disappointed. Because I don't think it's a good idea to call people out for grandstanding. For several reasons. One, as I've already mentioned, it's very hard to be sure whether someone is grandstanding. And so it's just unfair to accuse people of this if they're not actually doing it. It's very hard to tell what is in someone's heart. And so I think it's just bad to accuse people of doing this willy-nilly. Secondly, I promise you, if you accuse someone of grandstanding, they will return the favor. I promise you, every single time. You're grandstanding. And now you're in a stupid argument about who's grandstanding and what's in my heart and what's in your heart. And we've now just made public discourse worse. We've added some toxic waste to the public square. That's bad. Furthermore, the use of the term grandstanding can fall prey to what some people call conceptual drift. People think that they can dismiss anything they don't like by saying, "You're grandstanding." They realize it can be a tool to silence people, to accuse people, to embarrass them, and so on. And so they can use tactical accusations of grandstanding to stop conversations, to silence people. But once people realize you can do this, people will start making the accusation all the time. "Professor Fritz, you were grandstanding, stop it." And he has to okay, whatever. I don't want to argue back, so I guess I got to be quiet. And then I've just silenced him. About everything. And this conceptual drift, so grandstanding just becomes things that you don't like that people say. That's not what grandstanding is. This conceptual drift happens a lot in public discourse. It happens to mansplaining. So mansplaining used to mean a man who is ignorant about something sort of impolitely or rudely explaining something to a woman. Now, it's like anytime a man explains something, right? People get accused of mansplaining. Or gaslighting. Gaslighting has a very specific meaning in psychology. It's like psychological torture to try to mess with someone's mind. Now gaslighting just means, "You disagree with me. Stop gaslighting me." "No, I just disagree with you." So you can see if you accuse someone of gaslighting or mansplaining or grandstanding, that what falls under the concept just explodes, and that's bad. We want to preserve grandstanding for a very specific kind of behavior. So I don't think you should go around calling people out. Sorry. I don't think that's a good idea. So what should you do? What I encourage is to not ask, "How can I be the moral police?" but to ask, "What am I doing in public discourse? How am I contributing?" Turn our attention to ourselves. So you can ask yourself, whenever you're ready to fire up Facebook or post on Reddit or a recipe blog or am I trying to do good with my moral talk, or am I just trying to look good? Am I trying to do good? What am I really doing that's good by saying this? Second, you can redirect your recognition desire. Remember, your recognition desire is your desire for status, to desire to impress people, to be seen as morally good. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be seen as a good person. There's nothing wrong with that. So if you want to be seen as a good person, go do something good, take a selfie, and post it on Instagram. So go to a soup kitchen, volunteer with Big Brothers Big Sisters. And actually, when you're at the baseball game, take a selfie and post it on Instagram. Say, "I volunteer." See? At least you're doing something good instead of just engaging in toxic, cheap talk. So these are the two. We give a much more suggestions in the book, but ask yourself, am I doing good or looking good? And how can I redirect my recognition desire to more productive purposes? However, I do think there are some things that we can do socially without calling people out that can affect social change. Here's one. Stop rewarding behavior that you suspect is grandstanding. I suspect there's that uncle, the cousin, the colleague on Facebook or social media. You're like, "Well, there they go again." And ignore it. No one has earned or deserves your Facebook likes or Instagram faves. You don't owe anyone any of these things. You're not hurting them by not rewarding their behavior. So you don't have to be certain if they're grandstanding to just deprive them of a Facebook like. And the idea is to make grandstanding embarrassing. Imagine you write this long post about how the server at P.F. Chang's engaged in this microaggression, and you're expecting all this, "Oh, you really do care about us, oh, thank you," and no one likes it. For most of us, that's embarrassing. You think, "Oh, maybe I should stop doing that and go play with my kids instead or something," So stop rewarding behavior that you suspect is grandstanding. And I do think it's okay to make fun of the general practice of grandstanding, like we're doing right now. We're all sort of joking and, oh yeah, who does that? Not me. And this is to promote private feelings of embarrassment, such that if you do catch yourself in this behavior, you'll think, oh yeah, that would be embarrassing to do something like that. So don't like your annoying friend's posts, and don't easily be impressed by cheap talk. I'll conclude like this. We all have to exist together on campus, in our classrooms, in our workplaces, online, at the gym, at a P.F. Chang's. And we often have to speak to one another in the public square about important moral and political issues. We have to use moral talk. And I want to conclude by encouraging you to think of moral talk as a tool. It allows us to work together to make sure people are treated with respect. And moral talk has been used on some impressive moral projects. But like many tools, moral talk can be put to alternative uses. And some of these uses that we put moral talk to are less than admirable. Consider the hammer. Hammers can be used to build homes, but they can also be used to hit people. Whether swinging a hammer is a good thing depends on what it's being swung at and why. And like hammers, moral talk can be put to good use. But moral talk is not magic. You don't automatically improve the world because your heart's in the right place or because you're saying magic words. Moral talk can also be used in ways that disrespect and harm the public square. And I've tried to argue in our time tonight that grandstanding is one way to abuse moral talk. Our public discourse would be better if there was less of it. No one over the age of 3 would cheer every swing of a hammer, nor should we cheer every instance of moral talk. Thank you.
Great talk. Oh, sorry. I was wondering how you think this relates to these other two terms that have come up a lot since 2016, virtue signaling and public condemnations, of which
Yeah.
it seems like we have a lot of public condemnations. Are these like variants of grandstanding, or do they serve some larger purpose?
Good, excellent. I can't wait for the virtue signal question. This is my favorite question. So I'll give you a very brief story, and then I'll say why grandstanding is different than virtue signaling, and why I think virtue signaling is actually not a very helpful term. We started writing this paper in 2014. Believe it or not, that's a long time ago. Virtue signaling was not in the public discourse in 2014. It looked like it started picking up steam in 2015 in an article in The Spectator. Okay? So back then, the only word that people used for this kind of like high and mighty talk was grandstanding. Obama accused Republicans of it. We have, all through the 20th century. It dates back to a book on baseball in 1888. That's where we get the term from. It's the grandstand player. He'd roll around, show off, and play to the grandstands. Okay? And then this term virtue signaling came about, and Justin and I were like, oh my gosh. Because virtue signaling picked up as the term. It sounds cooler or something like that. It sounds like scientific or something. So here's what I say. For all practical purposes, if it's helpful to think of grandstanding as virtue signaling, that's fine. However, in my experience, talking about virtue signaling is extremely misleading. Here's what often happens. What could be wrong with signaling virtue? I'm standing in line patiently. I'm signaling virtue. I take my kids out for a special treat and treat them kindly in front of everyone. I'm showing that I'm a good person. So there's nothing wrong in the way that biologists and economists and psychologists talk about signaling. There's nothing wrong with communicating as a matter of fact that you're a good person. So there's a lot of other problems I have with the term. One of the other ones is that you don't have to be actually signaling virtue to grandstand. You could be just trying to show that you're a decent person. So, and then we have this talk about vice signaling. So like vice signaling is like supposed to be like you're showing off how bad you are, but like really people trying to show off how bad they are, or are they just virtue signaling, but they're being accused of a vice because the out group thinks it's a vice compared to the, so you can see this gets real messy real quick. So it's basically a similar idea, but I don't think the term is useful because people will often, I've had philosophers say, what's wrong with showing that you're virtuous? Nothing. What we think is bad is using public discourse to show off. That's what we think is bad. And virtue signaling doesn't really capture that. It's on.
You hinted this towards the end of your talk, but hear you speaking, it feels that there is a very strong political dimension to all of this. Just to give you an example, I'm thinking about back in history, 5th century when Christianity becomes predominant, they do it by feeling that they have a moral superiority versus the pagans and destroying pagan temples collectively. More recently, you got, I remember there was an interview with Elon Musk who was claiming that the use of empathy as being misused politically to guide the public towards decisions that are harmful for society. So, did you talk in the book, or have you thought about the large-scale consequences of groups of people being organized to take the same standing practices to basically win against another group?
Wow, there's a lot to say there. So often the criticism is like, well, don't you think your moral views are right? Of course you think your moral views are right. I think my group thinks its views are right, and your group thinks its views are right. That's all true. The question is, what next? And what we're suggesting is there are lots of ways to persuade, compromise, convince, understand that use moral talk for its justifying aims. So one of the justifying aims of why we use this whole practice of talking about morality, one of them is to discover the truth or to make progress or something like that. It's not for my own reputational management. That's a bad use of this this practice. I will say this that you mentioned, since you mentioned Christianity, this is an interesting point of one of the few, maybe the only point of contact between Jesus and Nietzsche. So Jesus says, don't use morality to impress others. Go to your room and pray. Don't be like the Pharisees trying to show off. Okay? Don't use morality to show off. That's not what morality is for. Nietzsche says, he's a little more harsh about this, but he says, if you use morality to try to improve your standing over others, you're pathetic. Because you couldn't improve your standing by being smarter, stronger, more accomplished. You have to use morality, like you're typing on the computer, I'm going to get you, right? So we have this will to power. We want to overcome obstacles and be powerful. And Nietzsche says, justice, right? You're on your computer fighting with people. He says, that's pathetic. Don't use morality for that. He's got other views about morality I won't go into. But, so I don't know if I answered your question or not. Was that at least interesting? Okay.
Thank you. I want to jump back to the terminology question because I think it's so interesting. Going back to Donna and P.F. Chang's.
Yeah.
I'll add a different component to this. In your research, how do you distinguish between trolling and grandstanding? Because it occurs to me reading those comments that there's a lot of overlap or potential for overlap. And how does that complicate what you're trying to do with online discourse? Yeah,
good. I don't have a theory of trolling. But as someone who has probably done it, I can just report to you my personal psychology. And I don't think trolls are often or centrally interested in impressing other people. I think what trolls are interested in is getting a reaction. I think trolls are centrally interested in annoying, making life difficult, embarrassing. And there's some overlap. So you might embarrass someone to seek status. I don't think trolls are typically interested in status seeking. But what you point out is you could be a grandstander and a troll, right? So there could be some overlap. You might, because we have mixed motivations, right? Not all of our motivations are like, I'm only brushing my teeth for my health. No, I also want good breath, avoid the dentist, right? There's lots of reasons why I might want to. So we have mixed motivations, and someone might engage in some behavior that is grandstanding and trollish, but the idea would be that trolling could be decoupled from grandstanding. But I don't have a theory of trolling. If you have one, tell me later, and we can get it published or something.
Join me again in thanking our speaker for this great talk.
Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thanks for having me. That's great. Thanks.